Hey guys, so I know it is, I don't know, like 11, almost 12 maybe, here on Sunday morning in Korea. And I just first want to say thank you guys for joining this group. Thank you guys for believing in me and this vision that I have. So this is just a quick video because first of all, I look a mess. I need to take a shower. But secondly, um, I really wanted to just talk to you about my journey for this book. So this honestly could be a whole hour long video. So maybe I would probably do like a live in a couple of weeks, maybe a week or two. That way, if you guys have questions, then it would be a lot easier for me to just respond to those questions. But for now, I will talk to myself and hopefully answer some questions for you guys. So, how do we forgive our mothers? I believe that this has been something that God put on my heart so long ago, but I was just running from it like He has done for Hope and Her, for all those things that I have put out into the world. He really told me to do this, but I was just too afraid to touch it. So basically, like I've mentioned in my first post, that this has literally been a decade long journey. Me telling my story has been a decade long journey. I would say it all started around 2008, maybe 9. I was still in undergrad, and unfortunately, I was in this place where I was supposed to be graduating from undergrad, and I knew that I was not on the track to graduation. I was a nursing student. That's a different story, but I was a nursing student, and I was just really feeling down about myself. I was there were so many things going on in my life. I was very depressed. My grandmother passed away. No, my grandmother had not passed away, but I had a cousin who had passed away. My brother had passed away right before I went to college. So, and I kind of internalized that and didn't deal with that depression or that grief until my cousin passed away. And so it all just kind of hit me. And I was struggling with nursing school. I was struggling with Navy ROTC. I was a part of a sorority, but I had distanced myself. Um, so honestly, I was just really in a low spot. And when I say I distanced myself in my sorority, I was really more so, I wasn't socializing, but I was like a stickler for the business aspect of it. Like, I had thrown myself into step team. I had thrown myself into like giving myself a purpose, but not really emotionally attaching myself to anybody or anything. However, there was this one person, my frat brother at the time, who I really connected with, and we had grown close. I don't know, we had not even like been friends before then, but something just clicked. So we would hang out a lot, and he was really helping me through this hard time. And he pretty much, we had gotten to the point to where we were talking a lot. I would tell him certain stories, and he just looked at me and he was like, Hope, you should really write this book. You should really write a book about your life, because your life is so interesting. You've overcome so many things, and I guarantee you there are people out there, there are girls out there, there are women out there who will admire your resilience, and who would admire the fact that you have accomplished so much. And I looked at him and I was just like, boy, please, I haven't accomplished anything. Here I am, struggling in nursing school, probably about to get kicked out of nursing school. And because I'm going to get kicked out of nursing school, I'm probably going to get kicked out of ROTC. I was a year away from graduating. And I was not even, I knew I wasn't graduating. And so I'm like, what have I accomplished? Like, I have not accomplished one thing. If anything, I'm struggling, and nobody knows that I'm struggling. And he was like, Hope, you say you haven't accomplished anything, but look at all of these things that you have been faced with, and yet here you are today. Yeah, you may not be on track to graduating, but guess what? You're in school, and guess what? Regardless of the fact that you have, regardless of the fact that you have things may not have worked out as planned, you are still in school. Like, you literally have not given up. And I just kind of brushed it off. I was like, first of all, who's going to listen to me? Who is going to hear my story because I don't have a success story. Like, I don't have anything to share. Nevertheless, even though in my heart, I didn't feel like I had anything to give to people, I began to just write out the stories that I told him. Like, I literally would just sit and write every random story I told him, which was related to my childhood abuse, related to my family drama, all of these things that had happened to me. I understood like, how odd they may have sound, how bizarre they were. Like, he would look at me like, that really happened. I'm like, yes, it really happened. Like, when people hear some of my stories, they're like, no, no, I can't believe it. And I'm like, yes, it happened to me. Like, if I and I knew at that point, like, I knew that my life until up until that point had felt like a Lifetime movie. Like, things that had happened to me, I would have couldn't have fathomed it happening unless I was there. And so I was like, if anything, let me just write these stories out because they are kind of bizarre and I really want to remember them. For maybe I will write a book about these random things that happened to me. So I started to write just stories about random things that had happened, like my child abuse. Like, and the thing is, my memory, and I write about this in the book, my memory regarding my childhood trauma is very spotty. It's literally, I have moments where nothing exists in my memory. There are parts of my childhood that I repressed so much that it felt like it was painful, not emotionally, but literally I would have headaches just trying to piece together events because during those moments I dissociated myself. So for me to remember something that I had consciously or unconsciously tried to not even be a part of, it was difficult. So I wanted the little bits of information that I did know, I wanted to try to recall them. So this is hypothetical. Let's say I was abused at a Chuck E. Cheese. Then I would write a story and I would just title it Chuck E. Cheese. And everything I remembered from that moment at Chuck E. Cheese, I would just put it in a story. Or just, it wasn't even the story, it was just me putting all of the events that happens around at Chuck E. Cheese. Right? And then let's say I went on a trip with an uncle to Nebraska, and then I would write another story titled Trip to Nebraska, and I would just, anything that I could remember, I would just type it out. So I had written like maybe 10 or 15 of these stories, and a lot of them were really, really hard for me to get through. And so when it got to the point to where it was so hard for me to get through, I would close it up. I would not touch it. And then life continued to happen. So, whether I finished school or I met a boyfriend or I stopped talking to my frat brother, like, all these things had happened. So I kind of just pulled away from this writing process. And it wasn't even, at that point, it still wasn't even a book. Well, sort of, kind of, because my frat brother at the time, he was like, you should call it I. And he had he's very eclectic. And he had this idea of, like, he made this whole title and this whole description up. And I was like, okay, let's go with it. And and he wrote it out. I saved it in my computer and I titled this book called I for years. Like, it's still in my computer as I. And so I would go back to it every once in a while and I would add to the stories that I had already written out. I would try to put them in chronological order. And then, over the years, things happened. So I would close the book up. I would close my laptop. I wouldn't touch it. I had a boyfriend at a time who was really against me. Like, being in that relationship, it was so toxic to the point to where I was not encouraged to do anything outside of that relationship. So all the things that I had going on that I wanted to do creatively, I was really kind of forced to choose. So I didn't spend any time writing the book. I didn't I pulled away even more from my sorority. the things that I love to do, volunteering, working with the homeless. I was a cheerleading coach, all those things. He was like, you can't be doing all that when you're trying to be in a relationship. So I literally cut all those things off. And for 3 years, I did not look at that book to the point to where I wanted to add anything to it. And it's so funny how even though I didn't want to add anything or didn't type anything, there was never a day that went by where I didn't think about it, where God didn't put it on my heart to say, this is still something I need you to do. But, and that's just that's a whole different story, how God really, if he really wants you to do something, and he knows the path you're gonna take, he will be patient with you. And thank God he was so patient with me, because he knew I was just not prepared. I wasn't even ready for it. So, those 3 years go by. So by this time, it's like 2012, 2013, around 2012, 2013, I finally break up with my boyfriend. And now I have gotten to a place to where I was not even thinking about the book in regards to like making it a thing. Like, I thought about the stories and I was like, I just need to add to this. However, I was so, like, that relationship had taken me so far out of who I knew I was that I spent like the next 3 years just trying to figure out who I was again. I completely like just focused on myself. I graduated undergrad, obviously. Then I went back to grad school, and that was a whole other trial. And that was something that was traumatic for me as well. Grad school wasn't traumatic, but my fear, which was an irrational fear, it really affected me to where I was having breakdowns every day, just hysterically crying, not understanding. Like, I was completely fearful of, as much as I loved school and as much as it came so naturally to me, grad school did, like, it was a complete 180 from nursing school. But as much as it was such a breeze for me and it just came naturally to me, like, this is how I knew God had put me in the right place, because there was this passion about social work that is unexplainable, and I can't explain it in this video, but I will in another video. And regardless of how easy and natural it was for me, I was terrified that I was not going to complete grad school. And it wasn't based on anything rational. It wasn't based on my grades. I aced everything, but I was so afraid of failing, because I failed so much in undergrad where I would just have these panic attacks. And I'd seen a counselor. Like, I was working full time, I was doing my internships, I was doing my schooling, and I was like, I'm not gonna make it. I know I'm not going to. Something's gonna happen, to where I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I was terrified, and so I would just go to my counselor and cry, like hysterical crying, and there was no reason for me to be crying. And so she was like, "Oh, you have got to figure this out." So of course she diagnosed me with like anxiety and depression, all those things. So back to the story about my book. So, at this point, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can kind of dabble back into it. So around 2015, 2016, I started to add more to it. But again, I wasn't really focused on it. And it was really hard for me to try to, like, I don't know, it was weird, because the stories, even though they were good stories, for me, I was like, this is not a book. This is just random stories. How do I make this into a story that somebody would want to read? I didn't even really have an angle. I was just talking about random things in my life. So, after that, this happens over the course of years. So again, as much as I try to put it off, as much as I try to put this on the back burner, God always reminded me, like, this is something you need to do, and you need when are you going to just face it? So um it was still, I was still teetering with the idea of this I concept. It wasn't any concept, I don't even know, but that was part of the block. So I moved to Korea, and I meet a coworker, and we're talking, and I tell her, I've been trying to write this book for like 8-9 years, and she was like, you should really focus on it. So one of my mentors had just written a book right before I came to Korea, September of 2018, 19, 20. I don't remember when I came here. I've been here for a little over a year. So my mentor had just written a book, and part of her book was stories. Her book is called Little Girl Arise, and it was pretty much talking about moments in your life where you feel like you've died, and how did you arise from those moments of death. So she offered me the opportunity to write about part of my story, because she had known so much already. Like, I would talk to her all the time, and she was just like, I'm amazed at how you are able to just continue forward. Like, she's like, things that you've been faced with, people would not survive those things, and yet you are here, and for some reason you still have this hope about life, and this positive outlook. Like, you still are very much aspirational about things you want out of life, because sometimes when, like, just half of the things you've been through, people would give up and be like, there's no hope for me, there is no good out of my life because of these things. But I had always been like, even in my stories, like, whatever it was, I knew life couldn't have been what my moments of horror was. Like, I knew it was something beyond that for me, and so I held on to that hope even in the darkest moments. And sometimes I just feel like, none of that was me. None of it. I cannot credit that to my own doing, because there had been moments where I laid out on the floor on my kitchen when I lived in Louisiana, crying, because it felt as though my life was falling apart. And it felt like there was nobody I could talk to. And there was times where I could not eat, I could not get out of bed, I could not there were times where I would get in my car with an alcoholic bottle and dare myself to run into a median. I would dare myself to drive off the end of a bridge. And for me, I'm not a drinker. I'm not a hard drinker. Like, I would drink every once in a while, but it's like, for me to get to the point to where I would try my hardest to drink myself into an oblivion. And God was like, Hope, that's not you. You, like, I gave you this taste of, like, I knew that you would get to this point. And so I had already set it up to where I gave you this sense of, you hate the taste of alcohol. So moments where I would literally try to force myself to drink until, like, a blackout, it would never happen because I hated the taste of alcohol. Like, I would get down half a cup and then be like, I can't do this. Like, it disgusts me. And then outside of that, I would just pass out, sleep. So, like, God knew what he was doing, because I would try. Like, it was never me to, because if it was left up to my own devices, I would be dead somewhere. There were times where I looked to other substances. Like, I had never so much smoked weed up until, like, 25. Like, there was just nothing. And that's a part of my childhood too. Like, I just had this diversion from all of these things because I had seen it so much in my childhood. So, by the time I graduate, I have these friends and they are like, ain't nothing wrong with smoking weed. And I'm like, well, I've never done it before, so let me try it out. And I would smoke weed every once in a while, but that wasn't like, that's not what that wasn't it for me. But I remember in nursing school where I would be so antsy, and I don't know how I got a hold to Xanax, but somebody gave me a Xanax, and maybe I even went to the doctor for Xanax. I don't remember, but it got to the point to where I was definitely addicted to Xanax. So I remember where I was in nursing school at clinicals, and I had a close friend at the time. I had gotten to such a point to where I contemplated taking Xanax from a client or a patient that I was watching. And my friend, I don't know what, and like I said, again, every moment in my life where I wanted to go down the wrong path, God literally would step in. My friend at the time, it was just me talking about it. Like, oh, they got Xanax on their chart. Like, maybe I could take one or two. And she was like, Hope, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, do you want to get kicked out of school? Do you want to go to jail? And I was just like, I couldn't even think clearly. But nevertheless, I didn't take anybody's medication, thank God. But it just goes to show that I was struggling so much that I was willing to sacrifice my livelihood. I was willing to sacrifice my education because I was in so much pain that if it was left up to me, I would have been somewhere. Like, I would have probably been dead, or I would have been in jail, or I would have been like on the streets because I didn't have the willpower on my own to make it. I didn't have the resilience on my own to survive those hard moments. And so when people tell me, "Oh man, you have survived so much. You have, you no matter what comes to you, you've always overcome." And I'm like, yeah, I have, but it wasn't because of myself. And that's what made me believe that there is a God. There has to be, because if there wasn't a God, I wouldn't be where I am. So, again, back to the story. So, I wrote about, because my mentor, she would listen to my stories and she was saying, you need to write about this. So, I wrote like 4 or 5 pages about my story. And even me writing about that, I didn't think that it was as good as any other. I didn't think that it was as good as any other stories that were featured in the book. Even I had a close friend who featured her story, and I would read her story and like, man, my story is nothing like hers. Hers is so much more powerful than mine. And I would talk to my mentor about it, and she was just like, Hope, your story is powerful. You don't think it is, but there are people who call me and ask me about you and things you've gone through because they've gone through it. But I didn't believe in myself at that time. So she wrote her book. I was featured in her book, and I was just like, even still, like, wasn't really interested in writing my own story. But it wasn't, I don't know when it clicked. It was just me talking to my mentor. Like, there would be moments where I would feel so inspired and want to write something again, but these stories, they were just not connecting. They weren't just flowing together. I didn't really know how I wanted to present it. And she would talk to me about, ways to make it a story. And she was like, well, maybe you're trying to put too much in a book. You have dealt with a lot, but maybe you just need to simplify it. And so it was at this point where I was just like, okay, simplify how, So I just kept writing. So I kept thinking, well, maybe I should change the angle. So it went from I, which was really it. I don't know why I was like your eye. I don't know why that was even a thing, but I was stuck with it for years. So then I decided, well, maybe I should talk about it from like wounds and scars. So, how do you heal these scars? So I would literally, the hundreds of pages, or not the hundreds, but all the pages I had written up to that point, I would go all the way back and literally rewrite all those things to fit this theme of like scars and wounds and all these things. That didn't work because I was still stuck. So then I would do that for months. Then I'm like, I still can't, I'm not going anywhere. I can't get anywhere with this. God was still telling me, no, this ain't it either. So I was like, okay, well, let me go back. And I was like, well, I've always survived. I've always had to fight my way through things. So maybe I shouldn't take it from this angle of like, I'm a fighter. And so I would go all the way back and take out all of my stories and rewrite them all over to fit this theme of like being a fighter, being a boxer, and round one, round two, and knockout. And it was just like, no, that ain't it either. And literally, these were months at a time where I would spend redoing all of these stories, and still, it was not like God was still telling me, nope, that ain't it either. It was not until I used to have a podcast in 2016/17, all the way up until I moved to Korea. But the podcast was another thing where I just felt like it was one way I wanted to do things, and it just kind of got away from me, and it turned into something that I wasn't wanting it to be, so I just kind of let it fizzle out. But on one of the podcast episodes, I talked about toxic relationships with your mothers. And so at that time, I had my clinical supervisor as well as one of my peers in the social work world. She's an older lady. And, honestly, that podcast, it was something that I had read, or I think I've heard from another podcast, and I was like, that's such a good topic. However, I wanted to take all the questions that they had and implement it into my own podcast. So I did that. I went and I talked to these ladies because I knew that they had toxic relationships with their mothers growing up, or still do for some of them. And I took all the questions that I heard from one podcast and put it in another. And yes, the podcast, it was kind of, when I hit record, I asked all the questions. They answered all the questions. It was just like, sort of kind of just okay, right? The minute I stopped recording, we kept talking. I not threw away, but I put my notes up because we were packing up to go. And we sat there and we talked for another almost an hour. Me not recording, me not going off any script that wasn't my own, just me having this genuine conversation. And obviously I wasn't recording, but right before I got up, and that was probably the most powerful conversation we had, and I had no record of it. And I was just so upset, and I was just like, man, I can't believe I stopped recording. And right before I finished, or right before we got ready to go, my supervisor was like, Hope, this is where you need to be focusing on. Like, you can help so many women who have toxic relationships with their mothers. This is this is your purpose. This is the place you need to be. And at this point, I was just like, yeah, I don't think so. I think I want to do children and trauma because that's where I have the most experience. That's where I feel like I'm an expert in the area. So I was like, no, I can't. It's not really me. Not knowing that when I turned off that recorder, when I stopped trying to be like another podcaster or anybody else, like, that's when I would genuinely connect and share and like give them tips and give them hope. And she saw that in me. It may not have been perfect, but she saw something in me where she was like, this is it for you. Like, this is it for you. And I wasn't ready to receive that yet either. So here I am in Korea. By this time, I'm not working. This is like March 2019, right? I'm not working, so I don't have nothing but time. For like 6 months, I wasn't doing anything. So now I don't have nothing but time. So now I'm trying to throw myself into writing, and I'm going through all these different themes, and they're not working. And then something, I don't know, I think I started to clean out, because I have the worst ADD. I started to clean out my computer, and I ran across the old podcast, and I just decided to play it. And something in me, if God didn't speak to me through that podcast, then I don't know what it sound like, or what it feel like to have God speak to you, because that was nothing but God. Because I was in the process of emptying out my computer, because at the time my computer was just so slow. So I stopped and I was like, and what's so funny is the title of that podcast is the title of that book. And that podcast episode had been sitting on my computer for over a year. And I was just like, how did we forgive our mothers? Like, wow, this is something I had just teetered with a year ago and wasn't even thinking twice about. And I never would have imagined to write a book from that perspective. I just know that was a podcast I liked. I knew it was an issue that people had dealt with before, and I just knew, like, let's do this podcast. But I had never imagined taking it and turning it into a book. I had gone all other avenues. I had tried to go at it from all other angles, and I literally was not getting anywhere. Like the same 15, 16 stories I had written, no matter how many times I changed the thing, I would still be stuck at those same 15, 16 stories, and I wouldn't have gotten any further. Like, I went from, like, turning it into my story to trying to make it a fictional story where there were characters and these characters were going through these things. I was just all over the place. Like, this book, guys, I'm kidding you, it has been a process. So it wasn't until then where I was just like, man, maybe this is where I need to be. Like, maybe I need to just be real and stop trying to make it a thing like other people. Like, just talk about the fact that everything that has got me from where I was when I was a child to now has been somehow connected to my mother, my relationship. Even today, when my relationship with my mother, we are not close. We're really disconnected. It wasn't until then where it's like, man, I really should talk about this journey, because there have been times where I've tried to connect with her. There's been times where I've tried to tell her things. There's been times where I wanted to heal the relationship, but I just didn't know how. And then there have been times where I've been extremely disappointed at things she would say to me as an adult, the way she would act, and sometimes I would just be like, you know what, fine, we don't need to talk. And so that would be, and I remember all the times where I would be at work and my coworkers who are ladies, they would just be overjoyed about the conversations that they just had with their mom. They literally cannot spend a day without talking to her. They talked about what they were doing for Mother's Day, and I would be at work and feel left out because I could not connect on that level. Like, I would be like, I would be ashamed to even talk about my relationship with my mom because it was not like my coworkers. I would be ashamed to just say, well, no, we're not doing nothing for Mother's Day, or no, she didn't do nothing we're not doing nothing for Christmas. I'm not going home. Like, that wasn't our relationship, and I was so ashamed to talk about it because, one, it wasn't like my peers, and two, I felt judged because obviously there's been times where, you just be in conversation and people will be like, they don't treat their mama right. They don't do that with their mama. Like, you would hear the judgment when they talked about other people. So I was like, I don't want to put myself in a position to feel judged because they don't know the story. Like, it's easy to say, yeah, just call your mama, just talk to her, that's your mama. It's easy to say that when you don't understand the hurt and the pain that your mom has caused you, and you don't understand how, when you think about love, like, is what you feel towards your mom, is that truly love? Like, it's hard to imagine a place where you genuinely don't feel love for your mom, and that's the very first relationship you have. And so when you base your life living like, if this is love with your mom, if this is what love is and it's toxic, and you, a child, are supposed to hold your parent up on a pedestal, you're supposed to respect them, but yet they can demean you, they could talk negative to you, they can put their hands on you, they can put you in situations where you are in genuine danger, and they never apologize, and they never see the wrong in what they've ever done. And so you take the idea of love and you apply it to all types of relationships, from romantic relationships to friendships, and you really go through life thinking, this is love, this is what love is, this is the definition of love. Or even if you don't think that, you're like, well, this is what I deserve, this is the type of love I deserve, because even my own mom treated me this way. So this, if there's no other way, then I know this is all I'm worthy of. So I've spent so long, like, it's hard to try to explain that to people in a casual conversation. One, without being emotional, but two, you can't just say, oh no, me and my mom don't have that type of relationship, without some type of context. And sometimes you don't have the energy to, you know, go through all those things. And then it's almost, it's like, well, when you do talk about it, it's almost like your friends can say, oh, well, that's not bad enough, that's okay, you can get over that, you can forgive her for that. And it's like, no. And then you go through your mind and you try to come up with the topics or the scenarios that's happened, or your experiences that show this is how bad it got. Like, this is, like, if I tell you this, then you will understand. But you never know what that is. So it's just easier to just keep it to yourself. So anyway, I was like, this is it, God, this is it. So I went again for like the 5th time. I went back through my book and I just rewrote all the stories from the whole fighter type of theme. And I went back and I said, how do I forgive my mom? How do we forgive our mothers? And the minute I asked myself that question, things just started flowing. It wasn't easy, for sure, because there are still moments in that book where I get really stuck. There are things that I had to recall where it took me so much time to really process it. But it was the process of completing my book with what God had been telling me about. That was it. So, you know I went on a lot of different tangents during this book, or during this video, but I just really want you guys to understand how much care and effort I put into this book, how much of myself, like, I literally put it all out there. Not all out there, well, all out there in the sense of being completely transparent, but obviously there are other stories that I wasn't able to incorporate because the book would be 1,000,000 pages long and nobody would want to read it. So I had to be strategic about what I chose to put in, what I chose to keep out. And that just leads me to more things in the future to talk about. However, y'all, this journey, it's just been such an amazing journey for me. Now I can say that because in those moments I was just like, man, I know I need to tell my story and I'm ready to tell it, but shoot, it's taking too long. And a friend of mine told me, Hope, be patient because your story is still being written, like, and you are still living your story. And it's so true, because had I finished this book a year ago, the book wouldn't be what it is today. Like, because between a year ago to now, so many things has happened in my life that has changed the way I look at things, or even it influenced the book in so many different ways. So I think God really put me in every encounter, every situation, every experience for this purpose, and I'm so excited to bring this to you guys. I just can't wait to share it with you. That's all I got. I hope this video has shed some insight. I hope it's not all over the place. I will be doing more videos because there's so many things I want to talk about. And what's so funny is I have not been very comfortable with talking on video. And And it's just so interesting how I've literally been on this video talking to you guys for like 42 minutes. And I have not had to overthink any of it. So this just goes to show you that when you finally do what God wants you to do, when you finally are in alignment with what God has planned for you, things just come so much more easily. And guys, I struggled. Like, I struggled. Like, I could just talk to y'all all day about how I struggled. And I'm here now today. I'm so, like, these tears, I'm just excited for you guys to hear what I have to share. I'm so excited. That's all I got. So please, below, just tell me how you feel. Tell me what you are hoping to get out of this book. Yeah, just share with me your experience and how you think this book could be helpful to you. That's all I got. Y'all have a good day. Bye.